Hi guys, welcome. We're doing our VanCAF panel on publishing comics with Kickstarter. And I've got some guests here. We're going to be talking about Kickstarter and experiences running a Kickstarter and some information on planning a Kickstarter. So maybe we'll go around our Zoom here if you guys want to introduce yourselves. I guess I'll introduce your name, and then you can maybe talk a little bit more about your Kickstarter experiences. Just one person at a time here. So maybe Hanako, if you want to lead us off.
Okay, hi, I'm Hanako. I did my first Kickstarter was 7 years. I launched that back in last summer. It was my first one. It was extremely successful. It was like 800% funded. Yeah, it was my first one. I did a lot of consulting beforehand with people that I knew had done them before successfully, which I found the most helpful. Rhiannon RS and George Rohack were the two consultants for that one. And I was really happy with the experience overall.
Right on, cool. And Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my first Kickstarter campaign was run back in 2012. It was a 36-page color comic that I had done for my undergraduate thesis and I wanted to publish. And like Hanako, I had a pretty overwhelming early experience, but I also had a very low goal. So my campaign was 700% funded, but I'd been trying to raise like $1,200. And at the time, especially as a undergrad getting into the comics world as a freelancer, it was totally crucial for launching my career. So I've been a big Kickstarter enthusiast ever since then. I've run 3 campaigns and published 2 graphic novels with it. And it's a huge part of my career.
Right on, cool. And Haley, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name's Haley Boros. I just recently finished a Kickstarter. It ended, Lucy's jumping around. This is exciting. It ended, looking at my map here, February 27th of this year. I started it with, I don't know, like 2, maybe 3 weeks of preparation. I knew I wanted to publish my, my Three-Legged Tales little zine of my comics that I did for Inktober last year. This is my own personal first Kickstarter, but I've been a part of 6 other anthology projects, including They Have Issues, Fairy Fire, a 5e supplemental, Corpus, Everything Is Going Wrong, and a couple others like Local Haunts and a hero book GM a game master notebook that you can use while playing role-playing games. But I've found that it has been pretty successful. I've gained, a little bit more of a following since then. And yeah, it was about 150% funded, so not too bad, but overall a really successful first campaign.
Right on. Okay. And Jonathan, if you could introduce yourself to us.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jonathan. I've done the first Kickstarter I ever did was in 2013, 2014. I can't remember. It was within like the first month that Kickstarter was available for Canadians to use, because previously they had like a select list of countries that could use Kickstarter, and then they sort of slowly expanded where you could use Kickstarter. So as soon as it was available in Canada, I was like, I've seen all these American cartoonists doing Kickstarters. I want to do a Kickstarter. So just worked out so that was when I was finishing up my book, A Mad Tea Party. So that was what I Kickstarted. It only just made its goal, but it did make its goal. And since then, I've been running Kickstarters for Cloudscape Comics, and I've done, I'm not even sure how many Kickstarters, like a dozen for various books that Cloudscape has published. So that's always, of course, a group effort, but the sort of the day-to-day running of the Kickstarter is usually my responsibility.
All right, cool. And I feel like I should probably also have introduced myself. So I'm Jeffrey Ellis. I'm the founder of Cloudscape Comics. My first Kickstarter campaign was in 2011 working with Jonathon. And I think I've been somewhat involved with most of those dozen or so Kickstarter campaigns since. But I wanted to sort of get the sort of experience from you guys. Maybe first I just wanted to sort of springboard off of something Haley had said, which is talk about a Kickstarter increasing your prominence in your career in comics. So I wanted to maybe ask you guys, did you find that a successful Kickstarter campaign affected your comic career or your illustration career? Did it sort of increase your prominence overall in comics and in other work that you're doing? Did it lead to any other opportunities? Yes, Lucy.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Something that I counsel a lot of creators on is that it's really helpful to have a community already in place when you go to run a Kickstarter, but something that I didn't have when I started my first campaign was much of a reputation or a community within comics. But I had a very robust community in my environment in Portland, Oregon. I had a lot of friends in the social dance scene, or a lot of family members who were really supportive and like wanted to help my career get onto its feet, off the ground, some combination of those metaphors. And that was something that sort of got my foot in the door. And then I felt like that campaign established me as somebody who was making comics that enabled me to go to VanCAF for the first time and meet all of you in person at Cloudscape, which was a huge step into the comics community for me. And then since then, it's definitely impacted my work that having a Kickstarter, I think especially a funded project for some kind of consistent body of work, now more than ever helps publishers see that you're serious about what you're doing and that you have not only organizational skills and follow through, but it can give them a preview of coming attraction. And I've received publishing offers from external sources that I might not have gotten in front of if I was pitching or putting myself out there. So as somebody who is terrified of pitching, it's really convenient because you can just run a campaign and then other people will see it and they'll come to you and you don't have to go through the crippling fear of rejection of shoving your baby in front of them. So that's been a huge stepping stone in my career and something that's been really helpful for me for sure.
Right on. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in? Hanako?
Yes. Yeah, for me, because my particular comic was social media based to begin with, it built a pretty big audience just from that. And then once I was like, oh, by the way, I'm just going to do a Kickstarter and try and get a physical version of it, all those people that had gravitated towards it who were already outside of comics were like, oh, I want a piece of that. And it snowballed a lot of the range of people that were suddenly accessing my work, which was really nice. Definitely was not expecting a Kickstarter to boost my social media presence that much, but it did, especially once it started reaching a few Kickstarter specific news outlets and podcasts as well. Yeah, I mean, it led to my first actual book signing in a bookstore, which I had never had that opportunity before, because they were like, oh, you were actually able to self-publish this thing and it has a barcode that you were able to afford because of the Kickstarter. And so it just one thing led to another, and things are a bit different now than last year, before the Kickstarter, certainly.
It's totally astonishing to me how much legitimacy having a barcode and an ISBN conveys on any cartoonist and author. And it is something that you can just you purchase an ISBN. This is something maybe people don't know, that you just buy the number and then you have to generate a barcode, which I did wrong. And I'll talk about that when we get to failures. But I've had that experience too of bookstores being like, oh, you're legit. And I'd be curious to hear what people have to say about this, that there's not as much stigma attached to self-publishing in comics, that it's actually a badge of accomplishment or honor. And I feel like in fiction fields, maybe if you're like, this is my self-published novel, people are like, ooh. And if you're a cartoonist and you're like, this is my self-published graphic novel, they're like, we don't care, it looks great. Wow, you put spot gloss on it because you did a Kickstarter and you could choose whatever you wanted to do. It's so much, it makes such a difference to be able to have that marker of legitimacy.
Absolutely. Though I think maybe Jonathan, do you want to speak to, or you've got your hand up, so I'll let you run with it.
Sorry, what was your, you were going to ask me something though.
Just in case this wasn't what you're already going to say, I was going to just say, do you want to speak to ISBNs for Canadians?
Okay, well, Americans are going to hate this, but if you are Canadian, they are free. You just ask the government for one, and they are provided according to need. I know it's really difficult in the US because I think you can't just buy one. I think you're supposed to buy, I don't know if this is still the case. Someone else can speak to it. But I think in the US you have to buy like a bunch of them. You can't just buy a single one. So that's one advantage that Canadians do have. We got Kickstarter late, but we get free ISBNs. I was also just going to say that in terms of Kickstarter sort of being a way to sort of promote yourself, I've definitely found that that's the case with Cloudscape, where one of the big advantages of Kickstarter is that there are people who will go to the Kickstarter site and just browse for things they want. So whether it's books or whatever it is, and other sites that do crowdfunding don't necessarily have that audience of like people who go specifically there to look for something they haven't heard of before. So every time we do a Cloudscape Kickstarter, we always get people who know Cloudscape and have bought books from us before, or people who are fans of the creator of that particular book, or creators if it's an anthology, and come find us that way. But then there's always people whose names we don't recognize, who've never backed one of our books before, who found us through Kickstarter. So that can just build over time, that you have people who now know your work because they found you on the Kickstarter site.
Okay, and Haley, you have something to say.
I do. I would love to build off of Jonathan's expanding idea of reaching other people who you never thought that you would reach. I actually sent my book to Malta and like Germany and where else? Singapore and Brazil. And those are like the 4 international destinations that I went to, which is so wild to me that my little tiny zine has hopped its way across the ocean to a different space. And I think it's just really great that, like, particularly for my Kickstarter, is that it was able to reach such a wider audience, even though for a lot of what I do, it's not so much of a full-time job as more of like another full-time job on top of the one I have. So it's just kind of exciting to see that it reached so many people.
Right on. Yeah, it's I think that one other question I was just going to ask that occurred to me from Jonathan's earlier statement is, for those of you that have done multiple Kickstarter campaigns, when you're sort of sorting through the list of backers, do you find that there's a couple names now where you sort of recognize, oh yeah, they're always ordering a book from my Kickstarter campaign? Do you have any kind of Kickstarter regulars? That's a quick answer for this one, maybe.
Okay, I think I kind of already answered this, but yeah, no, there are people whose names I only know because I look at the backer surveys for every book we do, and it's like, oh, it's this person, it's this same person in Alberta, we've seen that person before, like they're buying another book from us. So that's always really exciting, because like these might not be people I have any other connection to, or that Cloudscape doesn't have any connection to. They don't interact with us on social media, but when there's a Kickstarter, like, oh, there they are again.
Yes, Lucy, yeah.
I've certainly been shocked. I mean, this is certainly true that like there are people who have carried through from campaign to campaign. I think the thing that I find most touching is when people who backed that first campaign in 2012 carry forward 2 campaigns worth of stuff, you know, or even like show up in other areas of my online life. Like now, if I ever interact with someone who says, oh, I backed True Believer way back in the day, then that has become like a more and more emotionally significant experience, because I'm like, wow, you were there when I was a nascent baby and didn't know what I was doing. And now like somehow have decided to follow along through a career that I would say has not been linear. Like it's not like people who loved campaign #1 are necessarily going to relate to whatever I'm doing now, just because it's been an amount of time. But yeah, definitely the same faces show up and the same names.
Okay, and Hanako.
Yeah, I think actually the wildest thing for me was I managed to do C2E2 this year before everything hit. And it was weird to have people actually show up with the books that I had shipped out being like, oh yeah, I backed your Kickstarter. And so like, can I get it signed? I was just like, I've never met you in my life. Where did you come from? Or I've actually had people who stumbled across me at the show too, are like, oh wait, I remember seeing this. And it's weird to see how far I can reach without me even having been to those places yet. And just meeting people who are completely new to me and they just stumbled across it on Kickstarter because they just happened to find it in the search.
All right, right on. So I was going to move on to another question here, which I think this may be an interesting one, which is maybe what was, if you're willing to share it, what was your biggest failure at a Kickstarter campaign? And follow up to that, what did you learn from it? Okay, Hanako.
Probably the biggest thing I learned from my first one is that you don't need to keep adding stuff to it. I got way too carried away with adding on like extras, like, oh, I can like add on like free stickers to people and like do all these other things. And I was like, that was money I didn't need to spend, because they just wanted the book and they got the book and don't need to do that. Like with the second Kickstarter I did, it's that one was strictly pins, but I found that just like streamlining it, it's still fine. People don't need all those extras. And you have to consider too, like, yes, you can add on extras, but you still have to cover that shipping. And if they've already paid that shipping, you're not going to get more shipping later unless you do something like Backer Kit or Pledge Manager later on down the road to compensate for that. So yeah, I think calming down with what I was presenting and focusing on the main product was what I learned out of that experience.
Okay, and then Lucy, you also had something to say.
Just to respond to that, I just backed a project that it was like a massively overfunded thing where I was getting an update in my inbox every day with new stretch goals that they were announcing. And I had that like visceral clenching of like, no, stop making more work for yourself. Like, please don't. Your poor back end people are going to have a really hard time with this. But some people can pull it off and they do it beautifully. And I have definitely fallen prey to that before. The major error that I found was that on my most recent book, 100 Demon Dialogues, I had used a barcode generator, right? The barcode that appears on the back of your book is just an encoded version of your ISBN, and bookstores should be able to scan it and then read your registered ISBN information about your book. And you can use barcode generators on the internet, but I made a crucial mistake and did not test mine with any kind of scanner before I put it on the book. Because it was, you know, heady design final days and I was just like scrambling to get everything finished. And I didn't find out until my very first time selling the book in a store. I did like a pre-release free comic book day event at my local comic shop, Books with Pictures. And the proprietress, Katie Proctor, when she went to ring up the very first copy of the book that had ever been sold in a store, was like, you know, this barcode doesn't scan, right? And I was like about to sit down and sign for a line of people and was like, what? Oh my God, so upset. But she was such a sweetheart because she was like, you know, this happens all the time. I have received books from Image, from Dark Horse, from like all of the, you know, like professional comics publishers who have printed their barcode in holographic foil, doesn't scan. Red, doesn't scan, the laser is red. Like purple on black also doesn't go super well. And she just ran down this list of things and I was like, oh, this isn't just, I think it's so easy when you're self-publishing to feel like absolutely everything is your fault and it's a product of you being inexperienced or puny or small or whatever. And it's like, people make mistakes all the time. And the fix was it cost money, but it was not impossible. I called the warehouse where the books were being held, and I uploaded a new barcode design that I had scanned, and then I had them print and re-sticker all of the books, which is like something that most warehouses will do for you. Things get re-barcoded all the time, and like, even, you know, if you see them if you buy a book from a bookstore and there's a barcode that's printed on the book, but the bookstore has put their own sticker over the top of it, like, it happens all the time. It's not that big a deal, but as is the case with Kickstarter errors, it definitely felt like the end of the world at the time.
Oh yeah, I could see that. Cloudscape has definitely had a few errors go to press. I think we were lucky enough that we had a printer send us a message saying, you know, that barcode's not going to scan. Are you sure you don't want to resubmit one scannable one? And they did that before they ran the job, so we were lucky enough that we got to fix it. But I mean, not all printers are going to check your barcode for you, so it really depends on who you're dealing with. Okay, so I saw a few hands come up, so I hope I do these in the right order. But Jonathan, I think you had your hand up first.
Cloudscape has done a lot of books, and so we've had a lot of mistakes along the way. But I think the one that was probably the most stressful was with Swan Song, where we were getting really close to the end of the campaign and it looked like it wasn't going to make it. And so we were scrambling, trying to figure out, like, what can we do? And there's not a lot of options at that point, because once you're in the middle of a campaign, you can't change the total that you're aiming for. You can't change the deadline. So you either make it or you don't at that point. Reposts from some bigger names in comics, and that helped us a lot. We were able to just make it over the line and get a little bit more. But if there's a lesson that can be learned from that, I think it's that when you're planning your project, err on the side of making it less ambitious. Print fewer copies, do a cheaper version of the book if you can. Because you never know, even if you've done successful campaigns in the past, that isn't necessarily a guarantee that the next one will work as well. So you can always, if you end up with more than what you asked for, you can always do a nicer quality print. You can do copies and reduce your target once you've started.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking as someone who's on the one of the people involved in that campaign, I think we're definitely feeling pretty hopeless until the final hours there, and then we felt really amazing because we actually made our target. But in hindsight, we had committed to this idea of a 12-inch by 12-inch hardcover book, and those are things that probably should have been stretch goals. So start with like an 8-inch by 8-inch softcover and just see if you can actually upgrade it. You know, we sort of started with the upgraded version. Okay, so sorry, Haley, let's hear from you as well.
Yeah, so I can speak to the what you said, Jonathan, about not planning in terms of like what you're gonna have for your campaign and like stretch goals and things. I feel like when I started my Kickstarter at the end of January, my biggest failure would have to be not actually taking that long to plan. I really only took less than 2 weeks. I feel like I should have taken at least the month and a half that the comics outreach lead at Kickstarter, Camilla, suggested you do. You go through, you look through all the videos, which I did do. I took quite some time, quite long stretches of time, just going through all of the information that you can read about launching your first Kickstarter. Very daunting, but I did do it. But yeah, biggest failure, take the time, do your research, figure out what other people are doing in their own Kickstarters, depending on the kind of book that you're doing. I just had a small zine, so for me, it was just a digital copy, the physical book. And I wanted to also offer a couple bigger things. So I did an original pet portrait commission and one of the originals from the zine. So those are the 4 tiers. Yeah, but I think biggest failure, more planning time.
Right on. And Lucy, you had something to add on to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that like I totally hear that sometimes, you know, you could have done, I'm astonished that you launched that campaign in 2.5 weeks because it was really well, like it was beautifully done. You know, I wouldn't have thought like, oh, this is one of those slapdash fly by night Kickstarter operations. But I also think there's something really admirable about that. Like it's so easy. This kind of goes back to the stretch goal thing that Hanukkah was talking about of like, we fall prey to this sense of, oh my God, if I'm kickstarting a comic, my goal has to be at least $10,000. And like, sometimes it's actually fine to run a tiny campaign. One of the things I love about, there's a class that Gary Chow and Christina Shi teach at is it SVA in New York? That the final exam for their students is that they have to design and run a $1,000 Kickstarter for their final project in their class, which I think is just such a good exercise for anyone to have, because that's like an audacious but pretty attainable goal for most people. And it's nice to have a staging ground that's smaller. So I think like absolutely do your research, but there's also something to be said for, and Kickstarter's had some efforts around this of like the Make 100 project where they encourage people to just do like limited edition 100 of something campaigns. And like, it's good to remember that Kickstarter can be small. Kickstarter can also be experimental. Like it doesn't have to be big commercial success. I'm going to make this thing and sell it in bookstores. And like, it's good to know that you can use it for all different kinds of things.
Okay. And then Jonathan, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I just want to jump off of what Lucy said that especially if you're doing your first Kickstarter, make it as small as possible, because a Kickstarter campaign, even though you can get people showing up and finding you on Kickstarter and backing your project, most of your supporters will be people who are already fans of your work, and it's really hard to judge the size of that audience. Like social media doesn't necessarily give you a fair indication of who's actually paying attention to you and who is willing to buy stuff from you. So make your first campaign as absolutely small and bare bones as you possibly can, as to sort of like make sure that you have the audience that it will succeed.
And Jeff, as you said, like everyone loves a success story. If you have, you know, a small campaign and it's a runaway success. I remember my first campaign, I thought people would stop giving me money once I hit my goal. Cause like, why would they? Cause we did it, we hit the goal. And it turns out that if you're making a thing and people want the thing, they will just continue to give you money, and then you can like still make the thing, but make it slightly nicer. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, overall, I mean, something I've always said about Kickstarter is I find it's just such a great testing ground for ideas, because, you know, in the past, before Kickstarter, if someone had an idea for a comic, they would have to just spend the money to print the comic, spend the money to take the comic to a convention, and then find out if there was an audience for it. And now you sort of put the idea on Kickstarter and you will find out if there's an audience for that book before you then spend the money on a print run, which I find is, I think, like a smarter way to do things. You guys can maybe respond to that, but also I think it might be good to also, since we've talked about sort of planning and tiers and the amount of lead time and sort of research and development of your campaign. If you guys want to, maybe we can start to talk a little bit about just like some of the practicalities, some of just like what do people need to think about when they're planning a campaign. So maybe what would you say is like maybe the hardest thing to plan when you're putting a campaign together? What's the thing that maybe you find is the biggest struggle? Okay, Lucy.
I think I would say this for a couple of reasons. Just because money is hard for people to talk about and conceptualize in general, that getting accurate, complete pricing for everything is so crucial. And I feel like I benefited a great deal from seeing other people who had run campaigns with really transparent Kickstarter spreadsheets that they shared, saying like, here's where all my money went. This is how much I paid everyone. This is how much it all actually cost. And the big one you hear people cite so much of the time is just shipping costs, like understanding that the USPS might raise their rates between when you estimate the cost of your campaign and when you mail out envelopes, and that can mount up to thousands of dollars if you're not careful. But I think also it's kind of like doing a budget for yourself, right? It's easy to think of your recurring monthly expenses. It's like, okay, rent, utilities, groceries, healthcare, I'm done. Unless you're in Canada, in which case, congratulations. Then it's just rent and utilities and groceries. And ISBNs if you live in the States. But it's like, then you realize that in an average month, you spend money on so many other things. And I think accounting for those unexpected expenses in a Kickstarter of like, hey, you got to pay somebody to re-sticker all your books after you screw up the barcode, or like knowing what envelopes are going to cost, knowing what the cardboard, chipboard backers that go in the envelopes are going to cost. Like it all adds up over time. And I think it can be really disastrous for folks to not accurately estimate what's going into that. And so I feel like having either your own familiarity with spreadsheets, or maybe finding a nerdy friend who's really into spreadsheets and having them help you break down just like, what are all the categories? And then maybe sending it to someone who's done a campaign and saying, what am I missing? Like what expenses came out of left field and blindsided you here? Because that can be a real make or break it issue.
Okay, and then Haley, you have something to add.
I do, but I feel like Lucy definitely hit a lot of points that I was going to hit. Typical
Hit
Lucy.
them again. It's important.
Well, that's okay, because I would have echoed everything that you said, because it's so important to know where the money is going to go once the campaign ends. And from particularly for mine as an example, I had to get things shipped to me, and they stayed in customs for a month, and it was a little bit anxiety inducing. But after that, I realized that as a positive, I don't know how to say this, but like I might have overcharged a little bit for shipping, but not so much that yeah, exactly. I budgeted so well that I definitely have enough money to like ship it to people and then have some for myself, which is like really nice. That's the success of a Kickstarter. Yes.
Right on. Okay, and Hanako.
Yeah, just to really quickly tag on that, just like give yourself padding for things to go wrong. Like, oh, like these books are going to cost a bit more than it was originally quoted because something went horribly wrong, or I had to change printers and now this printer wants way more than this other one. Just giving yourself like percentage room in the goals that you've set to have something go wrong and more expensive than originally planned helps a lot, I've found. Because things happen, like you can get quotes and think everything's going to be fine, and then everything goes horribly wrong, like this year. But yeah, just like, and then taxes, like I think people forget that, you know, if it does go over a certain amount, like you are going to be paying a good percentage of that to taxes, and being prepared to have that on hand when they come for you is really beneficial.
Right on. Okay, and Jonathan.
Yeah, so I just want to add on to the tax thing, actually, because one thing that I've discovered with my first Kickstarter campaign is it is hugely beneficial if you can plan your Kickstarter so that you receive the Kickstarter money and pay to print the books in the same tax year, because then you can write it off. And if you don't do that, you can still write it off, but you have to wait a year. And so during that year, you've lost that money until it eventually comes back. So don't run your campaign in December, get all your money on like December 30th, and then print your books in January, because that's going to mess up your taxes.
I have done this not once, but twice. Not even through running the campaign in December, just through like I ran it in the summer and then there were delays, and the way that things ended up happening, my accountant was just like, why would you do this? And I'm like, I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again. And then 2 years later, he was like, why did you do this again? I'm like, I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. Or sometimes it was beyond my control, but it's just like, that's such a good point. It does happen and it sucks.
Don't forget to budget for taxes too, because that's something that like you have to pay them, whether you want to or not, but you should.
Yeah. I find like a pet peeve of mine with getting print quotes from printers is they always give you the price per book before tax and before any like overs and unders. and they're just like, oh yeah, it's like $2 a book, and you're like, that sounds great. But then when the campaign's all done and you add it up, you're like, no, that was more like $3 a book. They don't want you to know all, they want it to seem cheap, so they don't always give you like the accurate numbers up front.
I have a quick Cloudscape question. Have y'all ever printed your books domestically in China or in North America, or have they always gone out to Asia or some other location?
We've mostly printed in Quebec. The prices, at least at the moment, between Quebec and China are pretty comparable. So it's a huge advantage for Cloudscape because we're in Canada, to print in Canada, because we get our books a lot faster. And they're still the same price, but we've done a few Cloudscape books in China, and both of my own books that I've gotten printed were in China. So the main difference is that you have to wait longer if you get them done in China, because they have to spend however many months on a boat. But I haven't had any other problems between the two.
I was just curious because I found I worked with a printer in Manitoba for my last book, and I was so excited to find somebody in North America who had like a comparable price range. I had talked to Hemlock Printing in Vancouver, but they are like a high end, they like print Kinfolk, which is, like super poncy, fancy magazines and stuff like that. And they were quoting me like $13 a book, something that for a $15 book, I just couldn't justify. And when I ended up working with Friesens, the company I found further east, I was like, this is unbelievable. And it was so much better just dealing with US to Canadian customs rather than having to wait for a boat. However on brand that was for me being into boats, it was still like a long time.
Yeah, I think Marquee is the Canadian printer we've done the most business with, but they're not the only ones. We've done books with other printers in like, I think our last one might have been Manitoba. Jeff, you were in contact with them, so you'll know this better than I will. It was
yeah.
Manitoba or Saskatchewan?
It was Houghton, Boston, and Saskatchewan, and yeah, they were great to deal with. And I think one thing that I hasn't been a huge issue for Cloudscape, but I would just mention that I do know that U.S. Customs cares if your book is printed in Canada versus printed in China. So I know that I imported books at the border once in a car. And they specifically asked me where were they printed, and I said they're printed in Canada. And they looked inside the cover, they opened up one of the boxes, they checked, and it said printed in Canada in the inside cover. And they said, okay, that's fine, then you're good, you can take these in. But I don't know what would have happened if they had been printed in China, but clearly that they were printed in Canada actually made a difference for importing them across the border. Sorry. And Jonathan, sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so this doesn't happen very often, but once in a while you'll hear stories about the government in China censoring books that are printed there. I'm not sure how thoroughly the government actually looks at every book that gets printed in China. Probably don't. That's a mystery to me, but I do know of a couple of projects where if it's a book that could be interpreted as critical of the People's Republic government, then they might just pulp your books and you have to print them somewhere else. So that's not a big risk. It very rarely ever happens, but it can happen.
And I guess maybe just to sort of continue a little bit on this track, do you guys have any other thoughts on shipping? Because I know that I can just specifically say for Cloudscape, being able to access USPS media mail made a huge difference for our budgeting in a Kickstarter campaign. But we have some American citizens here who that's just standard practice. But if anyone had any other like shipping tips or shipping information maybe for both Canadian and Americans. Okay, Lucy.
So my first campaign I fulfilled entirely myself, and I shipped all of my comics in envelopes from the post office in batches of 20 or whatever, and the tiny postal window got very fed up with me. But for my following 2 campaigns, the first book I did, Baggy Wrinkles, I shipped with Make That Thing, the Kickstarter related division of Topatico. And then the most recent one I shipped with Black Box, who are the shipping sort of fulfillment spinoff of Cards Against Humanity. And both of them, I learned a lot from working with both of them. I was really grateful, especially having 1,000+ backers on each campaign, to be working with somebody else who had access to warehousing and shipping facilities. The thing that I learned from Black Box that truly blew my mind was it is cheaper to ship to every other country outside the US, including Canada, from the UK than it is to ship from the United States. So for the orders that I fulfilled from Black Box on 100 Demon Dialogues, every international order was basically batched up. I had, I think, just over 300 going outside the US, and that was their cutoff number for how much it made sense to do it for. And we bundled those 300 books or plushies or whatever, sent them to a warehouse in England, and then all of the international post went out from there. And it was faster and cheaper by a measure of magnitude that was so staggering. Like it would have been, you know, $40 from the US or like 10 from England, and just frustrating that there are not better options available to us. And this is something that if you are a small, like a person starting out, might not be as viable, but also if it pays to make friends in the UK, like there are cartoonists in England too, and maybe you can do a little tit for tat thing where like y'all batch send each other boxes of things and then like ship each other's orders, because often it's not that many. But that really blew my mind when I did my last campaign. I was like, wow, this would really, it's worth it to know people over there who might be able to take advantage of those rates for you.
Wow, I did not know about that. That's amazing. And then, sorry, Haley, did you also have something to say?
Yeah, I was going to say that I'm not sure if the company that I use, Chit Chats, they're located in Vancouver. I'm not sure if they have other locations across Canada, but they're fantastic for shipping in the States. They take the package across the border for you and ship it from their locations there. So that's where I saved a ton of money shipping from Canada into the United States. But I used Canada Post for the other ones that, or the other backers that I had in Canada, and international, because it was, you know, it was letter mail, such a tiny package. Didn't cost very much.
See, we at Cloudscape, we use Chit Chats as well. They're across Canada. So actually everything we send goes to Niagara Falls, then it goes from Niagara Falls to the United States, as far as I know. But we actually found that the Chit Chats Canada option was cheaper than Canada Post. So we actually do all our stuff through Chit Chats now. So we do international, Canadian, and American all through the same service. And we bought our label printer so we can actually run our own postage at the studio now. So that was a game changer for us. And then, sorry, I think Jonathan, oh, yeah. Jonathan, I think you had something to say, and then also I see Haneko's hand is up too.
Oh, no, you already said it. I was just going to say that, yeah, Chit Chats is great because for some reason, shipping from Vancouver to Ontario is significantly more expensive than shipping from, say, Vancouver to Florida. So I don't know what's up with Canada Post, but Chit Chat can help you lower the price.
Okay, and then sorry, Hanako.
So from the American side, I mean, I fulfilled everything by myself. I found having already had a shipping subscription to stamps.com helped me a lot, just because like it had a lot of shipping integration options and tools that I could use to make everything easier, to print out labels, and then also like, oh, like it get me like slightly cheaper rates on shipping. And even if it's just like a little thing, it went a lot further than I realized. It helped me keep organized. And so just having that and having access to a label printer will save you so much time. The other note I would say is if you are someone who has a lot of different items in your Kickstarter and you're waiting on other things to come in, if you can ship some of the orders, just go ahead and do it. Just get them out of the way. It's a lot easier to do batch orders than to be like, okay, now I have everything, so now I can ship everything all at once. Don't wait. It's not worth it. Just get it out of the way. It's a lot less daunting, especially when you have like 300 some shipments or whatever you end up having to deal with.
Hey, cool. And then maybe I think maybe I'll jump ahead on this one. I just was curious if you guys have worked with like any of the kind of third-party services like BackerKit or any other organizations that sort of do order fulfillment or offer to sort of assist in the sort of the second step of a Kickstarter. I'm curious if you guys have thoughts on some of the different organizations and the services they provide. And I think it was maybe Hanako and then Lucy.
So for mine, I ended up using Pledge Manager. I was recommended to them, and so we talked to each other, and they kind of scale it based on the size of your campaign. Either like, oh, if you have under this many pledges, then it'll be this a flat fee for them to set up everything for you, or it'd be a certain amount per pledge over a certain number of pledges. And they can hop in at any time during the campaign to help you and set up basically a portal for people to access. I really loved it because it made it easy not only to like add, like if people are like wanted an extra copy of a book, they could just add one on really easily. They could also associate it where you could add on an amount for shipping, so you could actually get the shipping compensated. They took care of all the fees for like using Stripe, and like the money just like went into my bank account without any problem. I didn't have to do anything. It also helped to kind of keep track of backers and be like, hey, you haven't filled this out, I need more information. I could also add in items that were not in the Kickstarter, like, oh, I happen to have these other books that I already have on hand. If you want to add this on and just go ahead and buy that while you're at it, here's an opportunity to do so and save some shipping for yourself. And I ended up seeing a 10% increase from the amount that I originally got from the Kickstarter as a result.
Okay, and Lucy.
Yeah, I used BackerKit for my last campaign, my most recent 100 Demon Dialogues. And like Haley, I had a pretty simple campaign. I didn't want to have too many confusing tiers. So I had a softcover and hardcover version of my book, and then I had plush toys. And that was kind of the sum total of things I was offering. But of course, in any campaign, you do get a lot of requests from people who are like, well, what if I want to get 2 books and 1 plush toy, or 1 book and 5 plush toys, or what if I want to get 10 books and no plush toys? And it's very tempting to want to say yes to everyone and make tons of custom tiers for people. And I think something like BackerKit, there are multiple options for how to use the service. And I think it was valuable in many ways. It can be pretty overwhelming. They have a lot of features on the back end, and you can export all of your backer data in all different kinds of spreadsheets and things, but they are not a fulfillment service in and of themselves. So I worked with BackerKit and Blackbox, and I had BackerKit export a CSV, like a spreadsheet of everyone's names and addresses. That went to Blackbox, they fulfilled. But I also used BackerKit's add-on store option like Hanako, and I was just looking up the numbers actually to see how much post Kickstarter income I made, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be worth it. But I made an extra $7,000 from offering books and plushies for people to be able to just add on and buy. I didn't do what you did, Hanako, which I think is really smart, of like just adding your back catalog to the add-on store and being like, oh, you can just get any of my stuff, which probably would have been a very smart thing to do. And I've seen other people who have done that and like done quite well by it. So I think it definitely paid for itself, and it was worth it for me. But they take a percentage, right, of funding. So I think I ended up paying them a couple grand somewhere in there. I'm looking at my spreadsheet right now. Let's see, BackerKit fee, it was 3% of funding. So for a $50,000 campaign, that ended up being like $1,600, which was not so bad in the grand scheme of things, to be able to have somebody else manage all of that stuff. So if you can wade through all of the different export features, and like it'll help you send follow-up emails to backers who maybe haven't filled out their surveys, but I found that system a little convoluted. It's definitely just like good to have someone to hold your hand if you're going in there.
Right on. Yeah, we used BackerKit for Swan Song actually to offer our back catalog, and there was definitely a learning curve on just setting up the BackerKit. But once we got it going, then yeah, I think it was beneficial to offer like people who are just discovering us an opportunity to pick up things from past campaigns, essentially. Does anyone have any other things they want to add on to that? Or I was going to maybe start to just move on to just if you're offering advice to someone who's just starting a campaign. I'm imagining a lot of people watching this video, they're maybe in the back of their head thinking about starting a campaign. We've talked a little bit about sort of getting an idea of a budget and shipping, but just if you had any, if everyone can offer like some advice to like a burgeoning Kickstarter, what advice you would impart to them. Lucy, yeah.
Got so many things. I think this is true of maybe more so for Haley and Hanako and I, and maybe less so for the Cloudscape anthologies, but I'm a big believer in giving things away for free first and asking people for money later. I think this is one of the things that Kickstarter is great for, is this kind of like delayed capitalism where you're not holding your stuff ransom until people give you money. You're like, hey, I gave you this thing for free, or like I did this Inktober project, or this is my webcomic, or I've been posting these on Instagram. And oftentimes it's really advantageous, especially with Kickstarter, to create an ecosystem where people are already asking you, how can I buy this? When can I get this? When is there going to be a book? Because I think a lot of the time when it comes to promotion, it can be really scary to be running a Kickstarter campaign and like understanding that promotion starts, 3 months out from when you begin your Kickstarter, because you want that strong launch on day one. And that maybe if you don't want to share your creative work with people, that could just be you talking to your friends about the fact that you're working on it, asking for feedback on the page, like making it known in your circles and communities. But I think sharing the work itself is such a great way to do that. It really speaks for itself. And it means that when it comes time to launch the project, like the 100 Demon Dialogues was a 100-day project that I had not intended to turn into a book. And by day 30, people were asking. And by day, 80, I'd like committed to doing the campaign. And then it launched on day 100 and funded that day, because it was like people had been gearing up for it and seeing it every day, which like, I think had I just been trying to advertise the campaign as an advertisement of an upcoming book, I would not have had it in me to post every day. And I think my audience would have gotten pretty fed up with that too. But because I was giving them something new, it was like, this is a reminder, this is a reminder, this is a reminder, and then there it goes. So I think don't be afraid to share what you are working on with people far in advance of launching, because the idea is that you want launch day to be something that if you're only starting promotion the day that you launch, I don't want to be like overly simplistic or fatalistic and be like, it's already too late, kid, hit the bricks, but like it's helpful to have started earlier than that if you can.
Hey, right on. And Jonathan.
A couple things. So one, I want to put this idea, I'm assuming most people who are watching this are probably going to be making comics. If you found this through VanCAF, I want to say ebooks are a great tier to have on a Kickstarter. You don't have to pay to print them. They're easy to distribute. Some people don't want physical books. They would rather give you money to get an ebook, even if it's something that like it was a webcomic and now I'm trying to print it. If you have an ebook, maybe they didn't bother to read your webcomic, or they just really want to support you and they just want the ebook. And the other thing is to keep the Kickstarter simple. Like you don't need to have 20 different tiers. Maybe just 3 or 4 options is enough. Most people will just want the book. A few people will want more stuff, but you don't need to have like 20 variations. And you don't need to have like a professionally produced video. I think there was a thing when Kickstarter was new, people felt like they needed to have video to convince people that you could trust them with your money. But these days, I'm not sure how many people even watch the video. It's good to have, but I mean, it just needs to be there. It doesn't need to be great.
Yeah, I can definitely reflect that on the video part. I remember our first ever fundraiser campaign. We went out and we did multiple scenes on multiple locations, and we did multiple takes, and we basically made a short film. And it was a great video. If you ever get a chance, you should watch our waterlogged fundraiser video. It's an art piece unto itself, but I think that, yeah, now just like one person talking directly to the camera for 5 minutes is all that you need. But so no, I'll let Hanako and then Haley offer their thoughts.
So piggyback off the PDF thing, I'm a little biased because I'm very fond of pins. I really recommend having pins as a lower tier, separate from the book or comic or whatever it is that you're featuring as the part of your Kickstarter. I've seen people add on pins. It's like, oh, like if we reach a stretch goal, everyone gets a free pin. A lot of people just want the pin. And it's easy money where it's, if you have this tier where it's like, oh, if there's a PDF tier at like this level, but if you pay a little bit more, you get a pin and the PDF. It doesn't cost you anything extra to do the PDF. And it's a small thing where if people don't necessarily want to commit to a book, they might want the small token to remind them of the campaign instead, as like, oh, see, I supported the campaign. I got this thing that you could only get from the campaign. And there is a benefit to having a small item that takes up less space, but still has similar margins to what you're trying to feature, that I found really beneficial. And I also had like another tier where it's like, oh, you can get both of these objects together if you want. And a lot of people went for that as well.
Right on. And Haley.
Yeah, so I just have my Kickstarter tab open on my laptop over here, and I'm looking at the funding progress for my Kickstarter in January. And it's interesting to me to see like the steep on the first 2 days. It's just, whew, you know, because I had that engagement. I had people who, friends, family contribute to the Kickstarter. And then there's the slump, the mid kind of campaign slump. We're all rolling our eyes. Lucy's rolling her eyes for sure. You know what that's like. Don't get discouraged by the mid campaign slump, because it happens. It's been going for a little while. And usually if you're connecting with, say, someone at Kickstarter, they may do that. I'm not sure if anyone else has been in contact with Camilla at Kickstarter. I'm sure she has reached out to you when you were doing yours, but yeah, it really helped because she let me know, oh, we're gonna be featuring your Kickstarter on this day. And then at one point my Kickstarter had a project we love, and so that also brought it up into the like the highest referral section, where I'm looking now and it says like the top referrer is Twitter, which makes sense. I'm on Twitter all the time. And the second one is advanced discovery on Kickstarter. So that's pretty great. That's where a lot, like the second most, where a lot of the funding came from. But yeah, don't be afraid of that mid campaign slump, and you can do it.
Right on. That's great. That's great advice. And yeah, I felt that with the slump too. So Jonathan, I'll let you chime in here.
Yeah, so first I just want to say Camilla's great. Like Kickstarter is lucky to have her. She's been so helpful on every campaign that we've done since she joined or became the comics contact person or whatever her role, official title is. But yeah, I feel like that curve where you have that sharp incline the first few days and then like very slow the rest of the campaign until the last few days and then it jumps up again. I feel like that's even more extreme a curve now than it was when Kickstarter was young. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I guess the takeaway from that is be on the internet the first few days as much as possible, telling everybody about this. And then the last few days, be on the internet as much as you possibly can, telling people because this is their last chance. And you gotta like take advantage of that curve when it's steep.
Yeah,
Got
absolutely.
one more quick thing on the end of that, Jonathan, too, which is related to that, which is don't forget to reach out to your previous Kickstarter backers if you've done other campaigns. Like I know that when we say be on the internet, that doesn't just mean like get on Twitter and yell at your friends, although I think like Haley said, it's good to know where you are most active and where you have the most community online. But I constantly forget that I have a mailing list that I have cultivated at some point and completely forget about for months on end. Sorry, mailing list. And like there are people, we collect communities in so many different corners of our lives. And I think one of the things that I have often neglected until the 11th hour on campaigns is like, oh shit, all those other people who gave me money, like I just assumed they would know that I launched a new campaign, but oftentimes they don't. And I have done project updates on old campaigns and had a bunch of people just be like, oh great, a new thing from you. Like I just didn't know. And that will happen. Like even after 3 weeks of talking about it nonstop, you will speak to people who know you well, who are like, oh, are you running a Kickstarter? I didn't notice, which like, if you've been, you know, pouring your heart and soul into your keyboard every day can feel like somebody driving knives into your eyeballs, but it is not personal. It's just like, there's a lot of noise on the internet and it's a good reminder that you probably never can talk about it enough. So, you know, just like talk about it past the edge of comfort and then maybe a little further than that, and then give yourself a pat on the back and call it good enough.
Right on. That's great advice. Okay, well, I mean, we're pretty much at an hour here, but if there's any final thoughts that anyone wanted to share, maybe we can go around one last time if anyone wanted to add anything that they forgot to mention, or if they want to plug anything, any links people should go to.
The one thing I would say, I ended up putting all of my like Kickstarter advice and a lot of the stuff that I've said here, I went into in more detail on my YouTube channel, which I think you can just find me as Lucy Bellwood on YouTube. And there's videos about like running Patreon pages and other kinds of stuff there too. But I was really relieved to have finally made that video because people do ask a lot about Kickstarter, and it was nice to be able to put it all into one talk. So it's about an hour. And if there's stuff in here that you're like, wait, I want to know more about shipping, wait, I want to know more about manufacturing, you can find that on my YouTube channel.
Right on. Anybody else?
Yeah. I wanted to say you can find my most recently Kickstarted book, Three-Legged Tales, on my website, haleyboros.com. There's a link to my shop from there. And yeah, just want to echo what Lucy said. If anyone has questions, they can reach out to me too. Like particularly, I'm on like the lower sort of, not tier, I suppose, but like I made a small Kickstarter as my first one. So I have a very small amount of knowledge, but if I can lend any knowledge, that would be great.
Right on. Okay. Well, if any other final thoughts? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap this up.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you want to find the comics that I have available right now, they're all on Gumroad at gumroad.com/Hanako. And should you want to make pins for your Kickstarters too, there's PDFs on there that'll help you get started to minimize your cost and help that margin in your Kickstarter.
Strong recommend for Hanako's pin guides. Incredibly entertaining and well written and drawn and delightful, and very good if you are a person who is like, pins, how? So popular, what do? Hanako is the one-stop shop for wise advice on that.
All right, on. Cool. Yeah, no, thanks guys. And maybe I'll maybe at the end of this, if you guys want to send me the links, I might see if we can get those attached to the description in the video we post. But yeah, so thanks again for your time. Thanks for being part of one of our first online VanCAF panels. It's been a pleasure. So yeah, I hope you get a chance to check out some of the other events in the online festival. And maybe hopefully this time next year, we can maybe be in an actual face-to-face panel again. So yeah, thanks again, guys. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.